Welcome back. Getting to know me as a former refugee survivor. Former refugee survivor? What? That doesn't make sense.
You are a refugee survivor.
Yeah. Welcome back. This episode of Getting to Know Me is me as a former refugee. If you've watched the previous video, if you haven't, then you can. You would have heard the story of my childhood as a genocide survivor. And I kind of stopped it from when I arrived in the UK. So I'm going to tell you the story from then on. I arrived at the age of 6 to the UK as a refugee, and I still remember the flight that we got on. First of all, you've got to remember, as a child, it was really scary and daunting having been forced to leave everything that you know, everything that you love, from your family, from the culture, from your surroundings, your home. Like literally everything that you know, your grandparents that you were absolutely attached to and loved and adored, and the language. So coming somewhere where you didn't understand the language, everything was so new, the buildings looked different, everything. And for us, we'd never been on a plane. Ever. So I remember that first flight where we were on that plane, it was nighttime, and the idea of being in a plane, floating in air, flying in air, you know, it could crash. Almost sitting in your seat but not sitting because you're too scared to sit, just in case if you sit the plane would crash. We didn't really know what would happen, but I do remember we were scared. We were scared to go on the plane, and it was nighttime. And when we came over to the UK, like, you could see the lights from London. You could see all the little dots of lights. And it was a journey that I will never forget. Even when we landed and we went through to the airport, the first person that greeted us, she had such a lovely welcome and smile. I don't know if they were expecting us, because it felt like they were. They must have known about us in terms of paperwork and things like that. And I remember them being very welcoming, but also things feeling so different. It was so cold. The weather was really cold. I think we arrived around October, so it was very rainy and dark, but also cold. And we went through that airport. We'd never seen an airport, so seeing all these things that were different. And it was in the 1980s, so seeing men with long hair was something that we'd never seen before. Seeing people from different cultures, we'd never seen that before. Like, I'd only ever seen Kurdish people. And then when we went to Iran, you know, outside of that, we'd never really experienced anything else. And so all these things, an influx of all these new experiences just from going on the plane and landing at the airport, that is a very, very vivid memory. I remember things like, you know, when we were fleeing in the villages and you'd have bombs dropping down, our parents would often do storytelling, so they'd tell us stories. And I do remember my dad telling us we were actually meant to be heading to France, and he would say, oh, we're going to go to France and they've got flavoured yogurts. We just couldn't understand the concept of flavoured yogurts, because the only yogurts we had in Kurdistan were the ones that were being made from the villages and they'd be brought into the city. So we had we'd only ever had and tasted one type of yogurt. So when he said flavoured yogurts, we just couldn't understand and grasp it. But it was in France. And so when we arrived here and we started getting the food, realised now I know that flavoured yogurt was petit filou. And I got to taste it. So it's tiny details like that, but also the loneliness that comes with it when you've come to a new country that's very different, it's very new, you don't know anyone, you don't recognise anything, you don't know where things are, you don't know the language, so you don't understand. Going on the tube for the first time, that was a surreal experience. And it was at that time when people used to smoke on the tube. So the first time we reunited with my dad, he said, I'm going to take you somewhere, we'll go somewhere that you've never experienced, and it's underground, and it's a train, and it moves. I remember that journey so vividly. And I was actually quite scared because, you know, going underground, going into the tube, all the noise, the rattling, and it's dark on the outside, but you're inside and it's light. And I do remember my dad smoking in those days. So it was during that time we were taken into temporary accommodation, and then from there given another temporary accommodation. So we moved quite a lot before we were given like a permanent home. You don't have your family around, you miss your family, you miss understanding things. That's one thing that people really forget, is that when you arrive in a new country and you don't understand anything, you can't read and write, it was very daunting. And then we went to school. So I remember my first school, and I remember a best friend that I had called Alex. And Alex would take time. I wish I knew where Alex was nowadays, but Alex would take time, remember I'm only 6, to teach me what the teacher was teaching us. So if we were doing alphabets and letters and the teacher was teaching us, Alex would take time to teach me. So slowly going through each thing. And we built such a close friendship, and it's something that I'll never forget. But what I didn't realise when we started swimming, and swimming's another thing, we'd never been swimming, we'd never gone to the water, but the first time we went swimming, Alex was taken into the boys' changing rooms and I was taken into the girls', and that was the first time that I knew Alex was a boy, because Alex had long hair, and I'd never seen a boy with long hair up till that point. So for me, that was a really big revelation of, oh, Alex isn't a girl. I didn't realise that. I remember that so clearly. But also things that you'd go through as a refugee child that people don't really think about is your parents don't know how to read and write or speak the language that you're in. So we didn't get any support. We didn't get homework help. We didn't get somebody teaching us stuff from home because they didn't know themselves. So my brother and I were almost trying to figure it out by ourselves. That was one challenge. The kids would be kids. We were different. We didn't speak the language. We didn't understand. We dressed differently. My haircut was always cut by my mum. So you stood out, and it did bring about kids picking on you. And I remember this particular incident in the lunch hall, which actually had a massive impact on me, like further down the line. And we were in the lunch line, and this girl, so by this point I'd picked up a few words here and there, and this girl in front of me turned around and said, "Your dad's Saddam Hussein." Now I understood Saddam Hussein because I knew who he was, given what we'd experienced, and I understood the words "your dad." So for me, I'd pieced it all together and understood that phrase, and I couldn't respond. And I remember being so angry, like so angry. I could feel, the best way to describe it is like bubbling, fizzing blood, where you're just so angry that you start shaking internally from like the blood. And I didn't know how to respond, and I didn't know what to do. And as a child, I turned around and I just pushed her. And the teacher saw me push her. So from that moment, the teacher came over and told me off. And I couldn't explain to the teacher why I was so angry and why I'd pushed her. But I was sent to the back of the line, and I remember shaking and crying and shaking, but wasn't able to verbalize anything because I couldn't speak the language. And it really does make me think about now children who are refugees and what kind of support they get. Like, it's the small details that really aren't picked up on. And I didn't really get any support. I remember, some organisations would help us through art therapy and things like that. But really, art therapy, there's another thing that people don't think about. When you have experienced that kind of trauma of conflict and persecution as a child, when they get you to draw things, you draw what you know and what you've experienced. So you'll often find, which is what we were doing, you draw bombs or planes dropping bombs or people dying or guns. So I now know that those art therapy sessions that we had were actually a way for us to express all of that anger. So it started off with drawings of bombs and guns and people dying, but then towards the end it would go more towards what normal children draw, which is, flowers and trees and houses and, things that a normal child should experience. So for me, I do remember a lot of that, and actually that incident in school had a big impact in that it made me scared to ever speak about my past. And for many years, I really didn't speak about it. So throughout my teens, I actually just tried to be as British as possible and not really address or go into my history. So it really had a big impact on me going forward, where I didn't want to talk about my past, and I try and not raise any questions around it. So I tried to be like all the other kids at school. But it makes me think about how much support children actually need when they are refugees, when they are fleeing, when they've fled persecution. Just the journey alone is daunting enough, and how much children need to be supported. So it's one big reason why the child protection programs that we have at the Lotus Flower, my charity, is so important to me, because children should be able to be children regardless of what experiences they've gone through. How do we find ways to support children, to allow them to live their childhood? And that is a very, very close thing to me. And I kind of wish if there was one message that for people to understand is, we forget the impact it has on children when they experience displacement, when they experience persecution, when they experience conflict. It has a massive, long-lasting impact throughout adulthood. And it's so critical to be able to support children at that stage, to give them what they need to be able to heal from it. I don't think we were given enough. My parents had their own traumas to deal with. They had their own obstacles to deal with, the challenges of settling into a new country, learning the new country, learning the language, the systems, everything was new without family around. Like, remember, your main support system, your main support network that was around you is no longer around you. So you have to build a community again. You have to try and integrate. These are all new things, as well as all the trauma that you've experienced. So I never really blame or have any feelings towards, my family for not being able to support in that way, because everyone was going through the trauma in different ways. I think the attitude towards refugees when I arrived was very different to now. It's completely different. I think the attitude was very welcoming. I remember a Christian family who basically took us in every weekend, who we spent like 7 Christmases with them, and it really, really helped my family integrate here into the UK, and they played a really big role in our life. So there were good moments and there were bad moments, but I remember more of the good, definitely. It was a lot better in terms of support systems and what we had to kind of get us ready to live a new life. When you're forced to flee or you're persecuted, you don't have a choice. And remember, people are leaving things. My mum used to work. My dad was a writer. He continued his writing when he came here. He went to university, he got his master's. My mum was an interpreter eventually. When given the opportunities for people to stand up on their own 2 feet, they will definitely take that and start rebuilding their life. Because at the end of the day, everyone wants a better life for their family, regardless of where you are. And so for us, it was a journey of rebuilding a new life in a new area, in a new setting, new culture, new language. Everything was new. It's sad to see nowadays the attitude is very different, and it's sad to see some of the policies that come in place that we're seeing, the attitude, the way the media speak about refugees. It's really, really heartbreaking to see. I mean, communities are built through diversity, and how amazing is it to have so many different types of people from different experiences to build a community? How much do we learn from each other? How much do we give to each other? And I've always taken the good, and one thing that we were brought up on with my family was, my family was very focused on take 50% of the good from your own culture and 50% of the good from the culture that you're in now, which was the UK. So you have a full rounded experience of 100%. So that was always ingrained in us, and I'm really happy and proud of my parents for doing that, because it allowed us to embrace our roots, our heritage, our culture, and be proud of it, but also allowed us to embrace the new home that we were in and the new culture and take all the good learnings from that. And I think from my experience as a former refugee, I feel it's really, really important to start really sharing the experiences of others and how much we have to add to the community, how much impact we have. It's vital. It's vital for the world to kind of really, really come together. We need to understand each other, and it is about understanding. It is about educating. When I share my story with people, they are inspired, but also really inspired by how things have turned around, and they kind of see how much you're giving back. A lot. Just look around you. I think look around you in society. Everywhere that you look, you'll see that people from different cultures, people from different places have come here for different reasons. Everyone's got their own reason, but we've made such a vibrant community of it. And you can literally look down your street from all the shops, from all the restaurants, from all the businesses, go into your hospital, everywhere. We have so much to give. How about we all come together and share our experiences to do that? Reflecting on my childhood of coming here as a refugee has a big role to play in that. And I think for me, I have a particular experience from a childhood perspective, and that's why it's so important to really protect children and really give them the tools that they need for them to really embrace going into adulthood. So if you've got any questions, any curiosities, any thoughts, if there's any way that I can give you insight and feedback into that, I am more than happy to. It really breaks my heart to see what happened to me in my childhood is not unique. So many children and so many people around the world are still experiencing this to this day, and actually displacement numbers are going up dramatically. And the only way that we can really, really help each other is by having understanding, is by sharing the true narratives. And if I can do anything to help that, then I'm more than happy to. Drop me a message, drop a comment below. I would love to hear from you.